Femi, okay, you are watching the stream. This weekend, there were protests all over the United States.
The way how they treated George Floyd on the streets, man, is definitely one of the most brutal, one of the most inhuman things I've seen on this planet. For him to be an unarmed man, an unarmed black man, a minority man of color, and for him to be attacked by the police, for him to be strained on the police for 9 minutes, for him to have his neck, have a whole knee on his neck, it is definitely not something human.
Protesting the death of George Floyd, who died in police custody, was killed in police custody. Now, is this moment a turning point in US relations? That is a conversation we are digging into today. If you're on YouTube, share your thoughts, your experiences, and you too can be part of this conversation on the stream. I will introduce the guests. They will introduce themselves. Keisha, tell our audience who you are.
I'm Keisha Blaine. I'm currently an associate professor of history at the University of Pittsburgh. I study 20th century U.S. history, African American history, African diaspora history, and women's and gender studies.
All right, she's going to bring some historical context to this conversation. Welcome, Keisha. Hello, Philippe. Tell our audience who you are.
Hi, everyone. My name is Philippe Cunningham, and I am a Minneapolis City Council member, and I represent the 4th Ward, which is in North Minneapolis.
Good to have you on board, Philippe. And Damon comes back to the stream. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me back. Damon Young here, author of What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker, founder of Very Smart Brothers, and senior editor at The Root.
Yes, let me just share this tweet with you straight away from Africans Unite. They knew we were going to have this conversation. This is their reaction. Really cried when I saw the video of this policeman with his knee on George's neck till George died. I pray that this will be the last time we ever hear of senseless police killing of unarmed African in the US. I have my doubts. Slavery and capitalism are two sides of the coin. So, Africans Unite is already beginning to think that this may be a moment in US race relations. Damon?
I think that that is a very optimistic way of viewing things. You know, we've seen what happened with George Floyd, with Trayvon, with Mike Brown, with Sandra Bland, with Philando Castile. I mean, the list goes on. I could spend here. I could be here for the next half hour just naming names, and it felt like each time, okay, this is it. This is the time when things are going to change. This is the time that's going to be like the critical mass of attention and activism and outrage. And we'll see. But I am not, if I were a betting man, I wouldn't place any bets, place any money on this being the thing that changes everything.
Damon, you mentioned some very famous African Americans who died in brutal circumstances. We put together some of those images so people can remember this is not an unusual circumstance. It should be, but it is not. Philippe, when I shared that tweet about, is this the last time I will ever see this? I cried. You slightly rolled your eyes. Articulate that eye roll.
Yes, I would just say that navigating in this world as I'm Black and transgender. I navigate the world. Folks see me as a Black man. I don't believe that there will be any sort of real radical change around police and the relationship with the Black community. I do not believe at this point really that and evidence shows that reforms in the police department actually change police culture. And also really here in the United States, we really don't have a paradigm of what does it look like to actually not live in a racist capitalist society. We don't have that paradigm right now. And so not having that makes it very challenging for me to believe that we have the ability to move to something that looks like that.
Keisha.
I agree. I certainly want to be optimistic. I think we should keep fighting. We should keep demanding changes. But I do agree with Damon and Philip that it's unlikely that this will be the last time we have these kinds of conversations. We keep coming back to the same place over and over again. And I think what history has certainly taught us is that ultimately American policing was based very much on a racist system. I write about the fact that we can't understand contemporary developments unless we look back to even the period of slavery with slave patrols. And when we look at Jim Crow policies, we look at black codes, and the list goes on and on. But I mention that because if you understand the history, then you understand that what we're seeing today is simply a legacy of slavery. And I'm not optimistic that this will be the last time we're having this conversation.
Philippe, you are based in South Minneapolis. You're a counselor there. What is it like to be there right now?
Yeah, so just for clarification, I actually represent North Minneapolis, which is actually the historically black community in Minneapolis, which we have a very sordid history with police. I've been in city council for now 2.5 years. My first 2 years in office, we experienced 3 officer-involved shooting deaths. One was suicide by cop. What we're seeing on the south side is really a lot of pain and rage that is generational that's coming up, and that is spilling out in ways that folks may not support who do not understand that rage. Over here in North Minneapolis, what we're seeing really is actually quite a different story. Right now, we've had 2 nights of community patrols that I've been organizing with community because we've actually had white supremacists and KKK members running around terrorizing our community. Several homemade bombs have been discovered. The building in my ward was burned last night. 4 storefronts, 2 were black owned. So right now our community is trying to protect ourselves. And so it's hard for us to even have a larger conversation about what kind of changes we want to see systemically when we're just trying to even survive. So there are 2 very different experiences happening right now on the 2 different sides of town.
This tweet sums up what you just said beautifully, Philippe. It says, talk to the protesters who were there. You're there, Philippe. Discuss how peaceful things were at most of the protests before agent provocateurs showed up to incite violence and confusion. Damon, this is not the first time that accusation has been out there, that the people in the crowd are not necessarily the people who live in those neighborhoods.
Yeah, and that's been a drumbeat from people on the ground in different cities. You've actually I heard some mayors come out yesterday and this morning just to clarify that there were a lot of outside agitators coming in, and I that is true. That's been true, and people like Philippe who have been there on the ground will attest to that. But I don't. I think the danger in that is allowing that to replace the legitimate outrage. And so when people are viewing this and they're thinking, oh, okay, the people who are the most upset are these outside agitators. And outside agitators are causing ruckus and causing mayhem or whatever, but there are also people who are from these communities, people who are just mad, who are outraged, who are angry, who maybe aren't doing the like the anarchist sort of things that these agitators are doing, but they're bringing that fury and they're bringing that anger there too. So I don't. Yes, there are peaceful protests happening everywhere, but behind that peace is a rage, is a sadness, is a grief, and is a just a willingness to get out there and do something about it.
What I found, Keisha, as I was following and covering and reporting on these protests, is that the protests were about police brutality. And as the protesters were on the street, some of them were facing police brutality. I want to bring into this conversation Palika Mokum, who works for Witness, which is an organization that fights for human rights using video by way of documentation. She, this weekend, was at the protests in New York, telling people how to protest using their videos and some strategy. Have a look at this.
So if you're at a protest and you want to document police violence, which I highly encourage you to do, there's a few things that you can do to make sure that you're safe and ethical and impactful. First thing is to know your rights. You have a First Amendment constitutional right to film law enforcement in public spaces. You just can't interfere, and whether or not you're interfering is completely at the discretion of the police officer. So try to stay at least an arm's length distance away, or at least like a car's length away. If police officers tell you to back up, it's best to comply. You can even film your feet to show that you complied and that you were walking away.
Keisha, that tells me that some of these protesters are ready. I want to dip into here on YouTube and put some of these thoughts to you. Never Obey says it is the perfect time to rise up and have our own political branch. We built this country. Enough is enough. I am going to suggest that Never Obey is a person of color. Keisha, is this a time of revolution? Are you feeling that it's a revolution?
I do think it's a time of revolution. And I think, certainly history has shown us that quote unquote obeying necessarily lead to the results that we imagine it would lead to. So on the one hand, I understand people who would resist anyone's effort to stand up to the police, anyone's effort to ignore the commands of the police. But how many times have we seen people comply and still lose their lives? How many times have we seen people, sort of walk the line, play the respectability politics, and still end up dead? So that tells me, certainly historically, that we can't always imagine that when we do one thing, the result will be what we think it will be. I think now is the time for people to resist. I won't tell people necessarily what they should do or how they should resist, but I think certainly they should resist.
This from Monitor Racism magazine. Thank you for following us on YouTube right now. The violence follows all of the tensions brought out by COVID-19, which underscored the profound inequalities that mark African American life. Philippe.
Absolutely. What we've seen here in Minneapolis is that the largest demographic that has been hit by COVID in terms of health is the Black community. What we see is that the businesses that are disproportionately impacted are Black businesses. Black businesses are not able to access the government resources that are available. That is just playing out very clearly in the data. There is so much here that is a layer on top of layer for generations. And I really want to go back to something that Keisha spoke to, which is really policing has its roots in white supremacy. And when we look at what does policing look like without that, it is incredibly challenging to even imagine that. Because how do you change the culture of an institution that has been around for as long as it's been, and it has its roots in such explicit white supremacy? One of the things that I think that we really need to be talking about now is, more than ever, something I've been a champion for years now, is we need to start getting serious and building the political will to build alternative systems of public safety outside of policing, which we have very clear evidence that shows us what that looks like. That's a public health approach to public safety, treating violence as though it is a disease that spreads, that can be prevented, that can be treated. And there are systems that we have examples even here in Minneapolis that work. However, we don't have the same kind of political will to fully fund those strategies in the same way that year after year we are pretty much have to keep increasing the police budget because that's where the majority of the political will is. So I'm hoping that we see a turn in the tide here so that we can have the same kind of investments in alternative systems of public safety.
Do you know, when I hear that, Philippe, it reminds me of something that We Cop Watch felt was very important that we included in this conversation. We Cop Watch, you can have a look at them here. They are an organization that police the police. They videotape the police. They're checking on the police all of the time. They train each other. How do we do this safely? Who is watching? Who is keeping us safe? Their suggestion from where we are this moment right now: police are the descendants of strike breakers and slave patrols, and we need to create institutions of justice that don't involve threats, violence, and cages. Be safe out there, We Cop Watch. Damon, I know this is not an idea that is new to you. The idea from Black Lives Matter's manifesto even is we need to be thinking beyond the police. Is this the time to do that now?
Oh, I mean, yeah, the time to do that is ceaseless. And as we've seen, the people on the street and people who, watching the footage, is that the police are the rioters right now. The police are the ones who are agitating. The police are the ones that are exacerbating. The police are the ones who are entering neighborhoods, as agents as a state and causing violence. And their job is to alleviate, but they're actually injecting danger. They're actually injecting harm into all these neighborhoods, into all of these protests, into all of these rallies. And and again, the evidence is right there. They're in every city where you've had protests. You see, the footage in Atlanta where the cops grabbing the young couple out of the car. There's footage in Salt Lake City where the police are just shove some elderly man with a cane down because he's just standing on a sidewalk. And there's more instances of like that. Linda Trietto getting her eye knocked out by a rubber bullet. And again, there are more and more and more incidents like that of the police being and acting like a gang, because that's what they are, and they have their own flag. I mean, any
Let me
entity that goes around and has their own flag lets you know that they are a separate entity from the rest of us.
So you're seeing those pictures there. This is Washington D.C. this past weekend. Silas Bill is saying here, watching you. What's the legislature doing to stop or limit the militarization of police in the country, Philippe?
Well, I'll say on the state level that in Minnesota that they are actually deeply entrenching the militarization of police. We are preempted at the local level by the state level from being able to enact really any sort of changes. In 2012, the state legislature banned civilian review authorities to have any sort of power, community power over police behavior and accountability, leaving the sole discretion of police discipline to the police chief, him or herself, themselves. And so that concentration of power is a huge problem. We can't require personal liability insurance for police officers, so that we don't have to keep shelling out millions upon millions of taxpayer dollars on the behalf of some city employees who are causing tremendous harm in our community. We can't do those things because the state legislature won't allow it. We see really nothing at the federal level. In fact, they are pumping money into cities to hire more police.
Philippe, I'm just wondering about this. You spent a lot of your time rolling your eyes and then smiling ruefully during this conversation. You live in Minneapolis. You've got a very descriptive, emotive face. What are you feeling right now? Is this a time of hope because people are paying attention, or are you feeling like it's Groundhog Day and here we go again and again and again? Where are
Quite
you? Where's your
frankly, it
mind?
feels like Groundhog Day. That's really where I'm at. Is it feels like Groundhog Day. And I am a descendant of slaves. My great grandfather was born into slavery. Like, that generational trauma is very real for me. I feel it in my bones. I navigate the world, feeling that hostility. I have had negative interactions with the police myself, and but I feel like this is so much bigger than just policing. Like, Minneapolis, I would say I've lived in quite a few different cities in my lifetime, and that Minneapolis, including the Bay Area, is the most progressive city I've ever lived in. And also, it has the worst racial disparities between black folks and white folks in the entire country, across every indicator of life, and that's right here in North Minneapolis. And so, I'm in the system, so that's why you're kind of seeing me like, like feeling
Yeah.
really slightly disgruntled, to be honest, because I'm in the system. I'm trying to dismantle the system from within it, and it is a hell of a challenge to try to dismantle a system of white supremacy that was built on white supremacy itself, not only in policing, but in government itself overall.
But I've seen
Yeah,
you. Yeah, go ahead, Damon. Go ahead.
I was going to just piggyback on what Philippe said, in that I don't feel that much different now than I did with Trayvon, with Sandra, with Eric, with Mike Brown. What I feel differently about right now is coronavirus still, and also, the idea, the reality that this disproportionately affects us, that the scale of its impact on this country is due to white supremacy. And we're out there in the streets right now protesting, marching, doing all that stuff, when gathering in public in large numbers is the single worst thing you can do. And so it's like, either choice, like you choose death either way. And that is the thing that's on my mind right now, because the police brutality, the racism, I feel I equate it to like walking past a dog in your neighborhood, where that dog is there. You have to be cognizant of it, but you're not going to divert your path. You just have to deal with it, and you do measures or whatever that I guess try to protect yourself. But this other thing that we're all dealing with is new, and I just don't know how to respond to that. How we are supposed to be protesting and out on the street right now, when we have this thing that we're going to bring back home with us and bring back in our neighborhoods with us. So we're out protesting death, but then we're going to be bringing death back home. And that's the scariest part to me right there.
There's something I feel is important that I should bring up, and that's, we would not be having this conversation if we had not seen a video of a policeman kneeling on a black man's neck. That would not have happened. There is debate going on whether that video should even have been circulated. Let me show you some of this debate. Maria says, don't share the video or the illustrations of the moment George Floyd was murdered. You dehumanize, you traumatize. And then another point of view from Chauncey, kind of hates seeing people saying, don't share the video of George Floyd. I say, share it and watch the whole thing through. Become aware of our struggle. I want to go back to Palika Moka from Witness, who use video to push for human rights. They use it as a piece of activism. This is what she says about the power of video and police brutality.
I think it's important to remember that video can do more than just elicit empathy and educate allies. It can be, if filmed, shared, and stored strategically, it can be used as evidence in legal proceedings or to support targeted advocacy campaigns. It's not always about how many eyes see your video, but which eyes see your video. And that's something we really stress at Witness. How can you film and store and share your video to create real impact and not just re-traumatize communities of color?
Philippe, without that video, I wouldn't even be talking to you. What's your take on it?
Well, first, I think she's brilliant, and we should all listen to her. She's got a really brilliant take on how to navigate these sort of issues and how to be able to use media that we have available to us. I will say that I personally, as a Black man, am traumatized by these videos, and I don't watch them typically. Unless I have to. So with one of the officer-involved shooting deaths in my ward, I had to watch the body cam footage so that I understood what the public was going to see when the body cam footage got released. I still have nightmares about that to this day. And so when we have these documented pieces of evidence, I think that they're really important for the larger picture of justice and making sure that the legal process works out. But at the same time, I do think that it is very traumatizing. I think white folks need to watch it. I think white folks need to feel that pain. But at the end of the day, like I said, I feel what my ancestors felt in my bones. And so when I see this, my dad, he says, when all this started kicking off in, 2015 or so, 2014, 2015, my dad said, who was raised in Jim Crow South Alabama, he said that this is nothing new, that this is just being caught on camera now.
All right, Philippe, that's why I'm going to leave it with your dad's words there. Philippe, Keisha, Damon, thank you for joining us. Thank you, YouTubers, as well. Appreciate your contribution to the show. I'm Femi OK. I'll see you next time on the stream. Take care, everybody.